Guitar scale formulas, C major, A minor, and related modes. This time looking at the C major scale, otherwise known as the C Ionian mode, starting our scale on the top or heavy E string, fret number 8, focusing our attention on the step from the 3rd of the C major scale to the 4th of the C major scale. One of our major objectives is to line up all of our resources in the same direction, making them as easy on the eyes as possible from the perspective of the player of the guitar who is located behind the guitar. Therefore, for example, my guitar is going to look like I'm playing left-handed, but no, we just flipped the guitar around in order to mirror your perspective from behind your guitar, as though you were playing it into a mirror. Similarly, our Excel worksheet representing the fretboard is going to have this representing the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, top to bottom, left to right, situated as though we just took our strings, took those frets, and imprinted them on the screen so that we can line up, in essence, what I'm doing on the guitar on top of what is happening on our Excel fretboard, which can line up to what you're doing from your perspective behind your guitar. We're going to continue on with our formula practice. We're starting out at this top note on the 8th fret on the E string, looking at the C major. Our focus, however, not being on the notes in the C major, but on the relative position, realizing that the fretboard, like an Excel worksheet, is maneuverable, the relative positions being able to shift up and back, so that if I know the concepts for the major scale, then I can move that same thing up and down the fretboard. Also, I also know all of the notes and all of the other modes in relation to the major scale. So that's going to be useful as well in order for us to pack as much information as we can into as little of a learning prospect as we can. So we're going to try to compact everything together. That's one of our objectives with these exercises, coming up with exercises that helps us to work on our fingering as well as our understanding in as little a time as possible once we execute and get good at the exercises. To do that, we want to get quite specific with our terminology and exactly what we're doing. And one of the problems with doing that is that the guitar theory or any kind of music theory is kind of cyclical. You start to go around in a circle, and I'm comparing this lately because I'm into the space stuff lately. Like if you're in space and there's no gravity, you've got no vector, no orientation, you're floating around, and that gets disorientating. So what do you have to do? You have to kind of pick where your focal point is going to be. And so that's what we need to do in music typically as well, because when we're thinking of music, we're looking at things from all these different perspectives. We have the same notes, and you might think, dude, there's only 12 notes? There's only 7 notes in a scale? How hard can it be to do like music theory? It's not even the whole alphabet. I know the whole alphabet. There's not even a whole alphabet in it. There's only 12 in there. But if you start looking at it from all the different combinations of the perspectives that you can look at it from, you realize the combinations become somewhat, if not infinite, close enough to infinite for us, right? So we have to basically then, how are we going to break down those perspectives so we can line up what we are looking at? And the way we typically do that in Western music is we use the C major scale, or not the C major, but the major scale, in particular kind of the C major, because that's what the guitar is framed towards. But let's just say the major scale as kind of our reference tool, our point of reference, our vector of orientation that we have on Earth that goes, the ground is down because of gravity and whatnot. That's what we're going to kind of say is the case with the major scale, even though all of the other modes are equivalent in reality. They're just as valid a perspective to be looking at. The major scale is otherwise known as the Ionian mode. The other modes, the Dorian, the Phrygian, the Lydian, the Mixolydian. Now, and the Aeolian. And so I had to sneeze there. I think I paused it before I sneezed. So in any case, and the Locrian. All right. So that's going to be the idea. Now, how can we learn the fretboard? The basic ways that we learn the fretboard. One way is by shape. So I want to learn the fretboard by shape, often using the caged system, and then going from a 3-note caged system to a 5-note pentatonic to a 7-note scale, and then we can break that down into 5 chunks. We're in that middle chunk right here, which is right in the middle of the guitar, which is what I would call position number 1. You could also call it a G-shaped C major chord. Why? Because if I look at that G shape right here, and I move it up to here, to that C note, then you can see here's the G shape. From here, boom, 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 boom. That's the fingering of the G shape. Now, obviously, if I finger it the same way, I've got open notes that I'm playing, so I'd have to play it more like this, you know, da-da, and bar it like that or whatever. But you get the idea. You can name the shape. In terms of position 1, you might know it from a pentatonic position, which goes from the 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7. If I add all the notes, 7 notes, we get to there, right? So that's going to be a shape that's fairly common. So I can learn that shape, and I can just learn all of the notes in the shape, and I can learn that that C is my root. And then I can convert, if I know that, to all of the related modes, because all the related modes, the D Dorian, the E Phrygian, the F Lydian, the G Mixolydian, use all the same notes. It's just changing the focal point of where we are at. The problem with changing the focal point of where we are at, however, is that usually we reorientate, say, the Dorian to the 1 position. That's why I call it relative position number 1. So now we've changed kind of our vector of what, you know, where we're viewing the thing from. That's going to disorientate us, right? But if I give my absolute modes the same orientation with regards to orientation, I think that's the same, with regards to the major scale, then that will help us to ground ourselves, right? So I could say now I'm on the Dorian, now the D is the first, but I'm still going to call the Dorian absolute mode number 2. By doing that, then it allows me to tie it into the relative major scale, which is kind of like being on Earth rather than on Mars, right? I could say, okay, I can see how the perspective from Earth would be. This would be up and down from my perspective, right? So so that makes it a little bit easier for me to understand, is the general idea. So once we learn the shapes, we could break these shapes down into smaller shapes so that I can memorize them strings by string, 2-string and 1-string sets. There's repeated strings, the E's repeat. So I could say within this shape and within each of the 5 shapes, I can break it down to what I call a double stop square or house shape, and then a 2-note per string, just a 1-string shape, and then a house double stop shape. So I'm going to try to emphasize that. Now this one looks skewed because this tectonic plate moved to the right. I call it a tectonic plate to visualize it, meaning the fault line right here, difference in tuning between these 2 strings, shifted this box to be shifted up. Otherwise, you have the same shape there. We have to deal with the fault line in order to visualize it that way. That helps us to basically break it down further, and it also helps us to identify each note. I'm not looking for the individual notes, but each relative position to the scale I'm in. Meaning, I don't care if I'm in the major scale, the Dorian, or the related Phrygian. What I want to know is what's the start in relation to the major scale that I can name the modes after. So you can see here, the B is the Locrian, the C is the Ionian or major scale, the E is the Phrygian, the F is the Lydian. That's always the case even when I go to the related mode. So the C major is related to the D Dorian, in other words. Although I'm focused on the D Dorian as now my tonic, changing the perspective, the C is still the Ionian. The Ionian is still in that same shape. The F is still the Lydian. The E is still the Phrygian. The B is still the Locrian in this particular shape. Now, if you shifted the whole shape up to like a G major scale, then all of these notes would shift, but the shape would remain the same. If I locate the box with regards to the G major and related modes, they will all have this, you can name them by mode, right? So that's going to be one of the things I want to emphasize in my mind. I want to be able to say I can identify things possibly by shape and then two-string shapes within that shape and give it an absolute modal name, because that will help me with my chord construction. So that's what I'm trying to get into my practice as well. So that's the other. Now, the other way we can learn this is by octaves, by intervals, meaning I can look at each of these notes as we have now named as a mode, giving them a modal name, and I can build around that this same shape. I can build this same shape by putting like my what do they call it when you draw a circle, a compass? Like you put the point of the compass on any note and then you draw the shape around it. Now, it won't be a circle in that case, but it will be based on the dimensions from that center point. And we call that the intervals. So I can then look at each of these shapes and I can build any of these modes from that center point. That's useful for chord constructions in particular. That's not going to be our main focal point here, but we'll touch in on it as we discuss the third way that we can look at this, and that's by formula, which is quite logical on a piano, which is like one string on a guitar is equivalent in essence to a piano, except that we don't have the skinny black keys, right? The black keys are just the same size as the other keys. So it's all symmetrical. That's why the guitar is actually more symmetrical than a piano when you go from scale to scale, because you don't have to adjust your finger positions, as you move from, because the black keys aren't a different size than the white keys, right? So that's going to be the idea here. So when we learn it by formula, then once again, we usually use the major scale or Ionian mode as our key or reference point. That's what the piano is tuned to, the C major scale, basically, or, the major scale in essence, or the, C major and related modes, you can think of it. But most people think of it as the C major scale. And I learned the formula, which is whole, whole, half, and then whole, 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 half back to home. My voice is going, sorry about this. But that's going to be, so that's the idea. But if I start that formula from any other spot, if I started it from the D, it would be the same formula. But from that perspective, we would start the formula from there. And that would be how I can create the Dorian. The reason this isn't quite as useful to most people's thinking when they were first thinking of it on the guitar is because we don't usually play the formula on one string as you would on a piano. We usually are going to optimize one hand position. So our goal usually is to say, how can I get all my notes within 4 to 5 frets, because I have 4 to 5 fingers, which means I'm not going to count up the guitar this way on one string, which makes the formula less useful to most people. In particular, because we don't understand what the interval is between the strings. But if I know the interval between the strings, then it could be quite useful, right? Because then I can play I can count through my formula and just account for the fact that I've gotten to my pinky. Maybe I want to go to the next string. Instead of going to this D, I go to this D. If I know how to do that, because then I don't need to memorize just the shape. In other words, when I go in this shape from this pinky to the pointer, I can know that because I know the shape, which most people do on the guitar. But I can also do it because I know that I'm trying to go a whole step from here, and I know from pinky to pointer is a whole step. And so that's another way I can see it. And my theory is that the definition of knowing stuff is being able to see it from more perspectives. The more perspectives I can see the same thing, the better I know that thing. And so that's what I want. That's what I'd like to do. I'd like to be able to do it by shape. But I'd also like to be able to say, hey, look, I'm going from here to here is a whole step. So I know that that's going to be a whole step from here to here. That also means that if I learn the formula, then if every time I want to walk up a scale, then all I have to do is look at the intervals of either a 1 note away half step or a 2 note away whole step. In other words, if I'm going from this D from the C to the D, I can see it's a whole step here. It's a whole step here. If I go to that D, I'm not thinking about octaves. I'm thinking about just as the notes in a circle. I can think of it as going here as a whole step. I can think of it going here's a whole step, here's a whole step, here's a whole step. So that means that the intervals as I'm going from note to note will always either be a half step or a whole step, and usually it's a whole step, right? Usually you're going to do a whole step, but sometimes it's a half step. Whereas if I'm thinking of the intervals from the first position, then I have all of the intervals that I'm going to be looking at that are relative, like 1 note away, 2 notes away, 3 notes away. So you've got the minor second, the major second, the minor third, the major third, the perfect fourth, the perfect, and so on and so forth. So if you're walking up the scale, then I could break up the scale anywhere I want if I know whether I'm taking a whole step or a half step, and I know where the whole step and half step intervals are on each string, because then I can easily jump to that point on any of the other strings. So that's one of the reasons that I think it's useful to kind of learn this concept. So that's going to be the idea that we're going through here. Let's do a quick recap on the process. So here's our formula down below. This formula is based on the low string and the top string, which are the same strings, which we'll have to account or adjust for if we're on any other string, which we'll see basically as we go. Note that the guitar repeats at the 12th fret. So here, that E is the same as this E, different octaves, but I'm going to think of this as a circle. So I'm not going to keep on going up past the double fret here. I'm going to go around on one set of strings, or one octave basically per string is going to be the general idea. So for example, if we went from this C here and we went up, we're going from the first to the second. So here's the first over here, here's the first, and then we're going to the second. From the first to the second is going to be, let's see how many different ways I can kind of see this. If I go to the first to the second, it's a whole step to the second, and it's going to be a whole step here, okay, to the second, and then I'm going from the second to the third. Now, by the way, the second to the third, let's go to the second to the third, is going to be a whole step by this capital W. Second to the third, second to the third is a whole step. So that's 2 whole steps. So in the major scale, if I was to look at it from the perspective of the root, now the distance from the C note is a 4 note away major third, right? So now I'm from here, I went from C, I went to D, and then I'm on the E. Now that E repeats on the top because now I'm on the 12th fret over here. So there's the E over here. So now I'm going to go from the E from the 3rd to the 4th. So from the E to the F is going to be a half step. So we're going to go half step from the 3rd to the 4th. 3rd to the 4th is going to be a half step. If I look at it from the perspective of intervals from the C, now what's the distance from this C? It's a 5 note away perfect fourth. It's a little difficult to count backwards. If I go 5 notes up, you get to this F over here. 12 minus 5 would be 7. So 7 back, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 back to that F. So then if I go from the 4th to the 5th, so now I'm going from this F, let's do it this way, to the 5th, 4th to the 5th, we're going to go 4th to the 5th here. That's going to be a whole step. So it's going to be the whole step going from here to the 5th, which is going to go from here to the G. And if I look at that G from the perspective of the major, of the C here, what's that distance? It's going to be a 7 note away perfect 5th. 7 note away perfect 5th, which if I went up 7 notes this way, it'd be 7 notes away. We're going behind it, so 12 minus 7 is 5 notes back, inverse distance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if I go from the 5th to the 6th. So we're going to go from the 5th to the 6th. It's going to bring me up to the A. 5th to the 6th is going to go from here to here. So that's going to be a whole step. 5th to the 6th. If I measure it in terms of intervals, it would be a 11 note away major 7. Wait a sec. I just went to the 7. 5th to the 6th would be a 9 note away major 6. Also noting it's the Aeolian mode, meaning now I'm on mode number 6, what I would call it absolute mode number 6 Aeolian mode. Now it's going to be a 9 note away major 6, meaning if I went this way 9 notes away, I would get to A. Inverse distance, because I'm going behind it, is 12 minus 9, which would be 3. So 3 notes back, there's my A. And then if I go from the 6 to the 7, I'm going from the 6 to the 7, and then we're going from this A to the B, 6 to the 7. So that would be a whole step. And then if I'm on the 7 from the perspective of the root, it would be an 11 note away major 7, meaning if I went from C up 11 notes, I would get to a B. Inverse distance 12 minus 11 is 1 note back. I can also see that that B is what I would call absolute mode number 7. So that it's always going to be that way. So where does it live? It lives at the top of what I call the house or the box. And then we're going to go from the 7 back to the 1, or you can call it 8, which brings me back to the C. That's going to be a half step. And that's going to bring us back home. And so that brings me back home. Ba-boom. Okay, so now let's do that same thing, but let's do it inside here, inside of our shape. So now we're going to go, okay, we're going to go from the 1st to the 2nd. So now I'm on this C. I'm going to try to keep it in this shape. So we're going to go from the 1st to the 2nd is a 1 note away. I'm sorry, wait a sec, is a whole step. 1st to the 2nd is a whole step. So we're going to go now, instead of going out here, whole step, we're going back here, which is a whole step. How do I know that's a whole step? Because it's a 2 note away whole step. And if there's a distance between 5 notes or 5 notes between the strings, except for where the fault line is, so it's going to be 5, 4, 3, 2. So the general rule is if I'm going from pinky to pointer, you have a whole step. So, okay, so that means I went from here to here. And so now I'm on what I would call absolute mode number 2, the Dorian, noting that the Dorian is living on what I call the double stop shape. So it's on the bottom of the double stop shape, and so you could see it there. And then I'm going to go from the 2, there's a whole step to the 3. So 2 is a whole step to the 3, 2 is a whole step to the 3, going from what I would call the Dorian to the Phrygian. So going from absolute mode number 2, Dorian, to absolute mode number 3, the Phrygian. So the Phrygian lives at the bottom of the house. So this is C's house. The Phrygian's in the basement. It's the rocker, punk rocker kind of mode. That's how I think of it, because it has that really kind of heavy minor second to it. So we have the 3 there, and then we're going from the 3 is a half step to go to the 4. 3 is a half step to the 4. So that's going to be a half step. All right, and then the 4, we're going from the 3, which is absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, to the 4, absolute mode number 4, which is Lydian. So we're going from Phrygian to Lydian. So the step from Phrygian to Lydian is always a half step, even if we're looking at it from a different perspective. So now we're going to say, so that's going to be the Lydian lives on the bottom right side of the house. It's a major mode because it has a major third. So then we have the same over here on this. So now we also have, what was I on here? Oh, wait a sec. No, I'm not. Yeah, here's the third. So now we're going to go from the 4th to the 5th. So we're going to go to the 4th to the 5th. So now we have to do, once again, I'm not going to go out here because I'm going to stay in the shape. So that would be a whole step. We're doing a whole step back this way. So that's going to be pointer to pinky or pinky to pointer. So it's going to be a whole step. How do I know that's a whole step? Because it's going to be 5 notes between the strings, 5, 4, 3, 2, back to here, okay? And now we're on what the absolute mode number 5, which is a major mode, would be a major chord that we would build, which is the mixolydian. The mixolydian isn't in the major house, even though it's the major, it lives with the minors, so it's down with the double stop, or here it's hanging with the A and the 2-note per string shape, what I call the meat of the hamburger, because if it was a pentatonic shape, that would be the pentatonic shape. This is always in the middle, or the meat of the hamburger. I'll say, and then we're going to go from the 5 to the 6. 5 to the 6 is going to be a whole step. 5 to the 6 is a whole step, going from G to A. And so that's going from absolute mode number 5, which is mixolydian, to absolute mode number 6, which is the Aeolian. And the Aeolian is the main minor mode. So if we built a chord from there, that would be a minor chord. And then and so it's on the meat of the hamburger, hanging with the mixolydian. And then we're going to go from the 6 to the 7, 6 to the 7, and 6 to the 7. That's going to be a whole step. So I can't go to here because I'm going to go outside my shape. So it's a whole step back. That's going to be pinky to pointer. How do I know that's a whole step? Because it's 2 notes away. The distance between the strings is 5, 4, 3, 2. And so that's going to be B. That's the Locrian. The distance from the Locrian to the major is the C in this case. This is an 11 note away, major 7. And then if I go from there, from the 7 back to the 1 or to the 8, that's going to be a half step. That brings us back up top, okay? So that's going to be then the octave when I go from the B to here. So notice that's still in the top of the house. So here's my house, which has been shifted up because of the kink in the tuning, the fault line, but it's still the top of the house. Okay, so that's going to be that's my general outline. So now we're focusing in on the move. What was our focus on here? We're going from the 3rd to the 4th is our point of focus. Let me double check that. 3rd to the 4th, yeah, that's our point of focus here. Okay, so that's going to be our major shift from the 3rd to the 4th, going to the F. So the 3rd is the E, and then which is also, you can call the Phrygian, to the F, which is going to be the Lydian, and that's going to be a half step. So we have a half step that we're moving. We're at the bottom of the house, so that half step, the half steps are important because there's less half steps than the whole steps. So if we identify where the half steps are, then it's more easy to define the whole system that way, right? Because the 2 half steps are the less common steps. So the 2 half steps are always going to be between the Phrygian and the Lydian. So even if I went to like the Dorian mode, when I go from Phrygian to Lydian, in an absolute modal standpoint, that's where the half step is. So we're going to say, okay, that's where one of the half steps are, at least. All right, so that's going to be the general idea on the half steps. Let's try to think of it from different perspectives, from the perspective of going, this way. We're going to say it could be thought of as the relative position 3 of the Ionian or major scale, which is Phrygian mode, to relative position 4 of the Ionian or major scale, which would be the Lydian, So we're going from 3 to 4, and that's going to be a half step. We can also think of it as just modes, absolute mode number 3 to absolute mode number 4, Phrygian to Lydian, which is going to be a half step. What if I thought about it from this E perspective? That E is the Phrygian mode. So if I was thinking of myself in Phrygian, building a chord that is based on the Phrygian with these notes in the Phrygian, for example, then that E would be adjusted to position number 1. we would readjust our focal point. How could I do that? Well, if I see it as absolute mode number 3, and I need to get it to 1, seeing it as the root, I could say, well, that means I have to subtract 2. So 3 minus 2 would be 1. And then I'm going to 4. If I subtract 2 on this one, I have to subtract 2 on this one. 4 minus 2 is 2, right? So I would be going from the first of the Phrygian to the second of the Phrygian. So let me just double check that. If I go down to the Phrygian, we make the E the first. Now we've got absolute mode number 3. Phrygian is now relative position number 1, going to relative position number 2, which is what I would call absolute number 4, mode number 4, the Lydian. So we still end up with the same half step, but now that E is thought of as the root, the tonic. That's going to be the idea. And then of course, so that's going to be what we can think of it from. All right. So now let's go ahead and follow that around on each string. So let's say, so now I'm going to go, if I was going to play the scale, I would be going, if I'm staying in the same shape, it would be C, D, E, right? And then I'm going to continue on this string all the way out instead of staying in the same shape after I hit that point. So I'd be going from C, D, E, right? Whoops, wait a sec. It would be C, D, E. So now I'm going to be here on this E, and now I'm going to move up on just this shape. So then the focal point that we have is from the E to the F. That's our major step that we're kind of working on, and that's going from the 5th. That's going from the 3rd to the 4th. So 3rd to the 4th is our point of focus. So it's going to be here. I'm measuring. It would be a half step going from the 3rd to the 4th. So we went from the 3rd to the 4th. So we're here. And then we're going to go from the 4th to the 5th. I'm going to continue it out this way. So now we're going to go from the 4th to the 5th, and that would be going from the Lydian to the Mixolydian. From the 4th to the 5th is going to be a whole step, and then we're going to go from the 5th to the 6th, which is going to be a whole step. 5th to the 6th. It's going to be a whole step here. 5th to the 6th. So we're going to go 5 to 6. That's going from G to A, or in other words, it's going from the Mixolydian to the Aeolian. The Mixolydian and the Aeolian, once again, being the meat of the hamburger. You can see it's repeating over here. And now I'm on the 12th fret, so I'm going to bring this back on over to this A in open position, open A. And now we're going to go from the 6 to the 7. So 6 to the 7 is a whole step. 6 to 7 is a whole step going from here to here. So I'm going to go boom, boom, to, whoop, wait a sec. Yeah, that's right. To the B. The B is the Locrian. So you can see it's still in the house. It's in the attic of the house, just like it was over here. And then we're going to go from the 7 to the 8 or 1, which is going to bring me back home. Boom. 7 to the 8 or 1 brings us back to the tonic. So we're going to say, so there's the C tonic. And you can see the C here is in the top of the house again. It's C's house looking towards the ocean. Same shape that we have over here. And then we're going to go to continue, I'm going to get back to that E. So now we're on the 1st. We're going from the 1st to the 2nd. 1st to the 2nd. 1st to the 2nd brings us to a whole step to from Ionian to Dorian, which is that D. So now we're on the Dorian, which is a minor mode. So it lives in what I call the double stop with the A on top of it, which is the Aeolian. And then we're going to go from the 2nd to the 3rd, which is a whole step. 2nd to the 3rd brings us back basically to where we started. 2nd to the 3rd. And that brings us to the Phrygian. And then the Phrygian to the Lydian brings us back to where we started from. Whew. Okay, let's see if we can do this a little bit more succinctly here. So let's say that we're going, now I want to go from this step from the third to the fourth, but I want to go back up to the top string. So I'm going to walk it through a first, second to the third, and then on the third, I'm going to look for the next step to be back up top, which is going to be up here, right? Which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frets back. It might be easier to reach 6 frets forward. So it's going to be 6, which will be across the line 13. So I kind of cheated a little bit, but it's easier to reach forward. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So now I could say, okay, if I wanted, instead of going down this same shape, I could say this is the 1, 2, 3, and then I want to find a half step. And let's imagine I'm going to go back up to the top string, and then I'm going to count it from that top string again. So now I'm going to say, okay, if I was here, I'd say this is going to be 1, the C to the 2 to the 3, whole step to the 3, and then instead of half step to the 4 here, I'm going to move it up to this F up here. So just to see where I can break this formula up each spot if I know it's a half step. Now, how do I know that's a half step away? I can count it out because it needs to be a distance of 2 notes away. I'm not trying to think about octaves. It's 2 notes away. So that would be 5 here, -5, I would call it 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. This is the octave. And then it's going to be what I would say 12. You can also call it 12, going around the horn. -1 is 11. Now, when I go above it, the distance has to be the inverse. So I'm looking for a distance of 2 notes of, I'm sorry, 1 note away to get to here. And the inverse distance is 12 minus 1, which would be 11. So if I'm looking for a distance of 11, which would be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, or octave, and then 12 minus 1 is a distance of 11. So in other words, if I went from this F to this E, that would be an interval of an 11 note away, which would be a major 7 from the perspective of the E. But from the perspective of the, from the perspective of the F, but from the perspective of the E, bottom to top, it would be a 1 note away, which would be, you can call it a minor second or a half step. It's a half step away. Now I can see that F right there is the 13 is also over here. It'd be, the 6 frets back the other way, so we're in our shape. And so now we went from, once again, the to the F. So now we're going to go from the 4 to the 5. So now we're on this F over here. And we're going to say, okay, so now we're going to go from the 4 to the 5. It's going to be a whole step. So it's going to be going from the F to the G. So F to the G. And so do to do, which is also, we can call the Lydian to the Mixolydian. The G's hanging out in the 2 note per string hamburger shape. And then we're going from the 5th to the 6th. So now I'm going to say, okay, now we're going from the 5th to the 6th, which is like saying we're going from Mixolydian to Aeolian. The Aeolian doesn't always mean it's an A note, by the way. It just happens to be Aeolian, starts with an A. It's a whole step. And then we're going from the 6, from the 6 to the 7 is a whole step. 6 to the 7 is going to be a whole step. 6 to the 7 is going to be a whole step. Wait a sec. 6 to the 7, yeah, is a whole step. And that's going to be then B, or the A, which is an Aeolian, to the B, which is the Locrian. And then the 7 back home is going to be a half step. 7 to 1 or 8 is going to be a half step, which brings us around the circle back to the Ionian or the major scale. Okay, let's go. Let's try to do this down on the next string down. So now I'm looking at the interval from the E to the F, which is going from the Phrygian to the Lydian. So instead of, when I get to this point, I'm going to break it up and try to find the note on the next string down. So instead of me going to this F, I'm going to go to this F and then play it along this string. So now I'm going to say, okay, now how do I know that's going to be a distance of one note away? Because now I don't need to take the inverse distance because I'm right below it. So I'm going to say this is going to be 5 and then 4, 3, 2, 1. It's one note away. So as long as I can find the interval that is one note away on each string, I can break up my pattern here on this half step, and then I can jump to any of the strings where that one note away interval is from the perspective of the E here, right? So in other words, so now I'm going from the first whole step to the second, whole step to the third. Instead of going half step to the fourth here, I'm going to say now I'm going to go half step to the fourth, which is going to be back here, which is going to be this F. Now the octaves are going to be different, but you can see I'm walking it. I'm still walking along it. So it's going to be 1, and then 2, 3, 4 is going to be back here, and then I can move from there and continue the pattern of this string. And once we do that, I'll compare the intervals basically to this string. So let's walk through that pattern. So now we're on this F. So that's going to be, once again, the 4. So I'm going to go from the 4 to the 5. So we're going to go from the 4 to the 5, which is going to be a whole step. From F to G, otherwise known as the Lydian, which is on the bottom of the house, see, to the Mixolydian, which is on the 2-note per string hamburger. So from 4 to 5 is a whole step. So now we're on the 5, and I'm going to go from 5 to 6, which is equivalent to saying I'm going from the Mixolydian to the Aeolian when I'm looking at from the perspective of the major scale. So I'm going from 5 to 6, Mixolydian to Aeolian. I'm in the meat of the hamburger shape. So I'm going from 5 to 6 is a whole step. So whole step from here to here, 5 to 6. So we're going to say a whole step from Mixolydian to Aeolian. And so now I'm on the Aeolian, and we're going to say then that's going to be from 6 to 7. 6 to 7 is a whole step. 6 to 7 is a whole step. So we're going from here to the B. 6 to 7 from A to B is also going from Aeolian to the Locrian. The Locrian is in the attic of the house. It's the one that's up in the attic. No one sees it. It's up there in the attic of the box house. And then we're going to go 7 back to home, or the tonic, 7 to 8, which is the tonic, 7 to 8, or 1 around the top of the horn brings us back. 7 to 8 is going to be C. That's going to be the top right of the house. C's in the penthouse looking towards the ocean of the house. And then we're going to go from 1 to 2. So 1 to 2 is a whole step. 1 to 2 is a whole step from here to here. 1 to 2 is going to be a whole step. I don't know if I need this up there. Is that helping? 1 to 2 is a whole step. And so we're going to go boom, boom, boom. That D repeats over here. So let's bring that to the top. That's going to be our open D. Our open D. And then we're going to go from 2 to 3 is going to be a whole step. So from D to E is a whole step. So now we've gone from here to here, and that's going from Dorian to the Phrygian, and then from the Phrygian to the Lydian brings us back to where we left for a half step. All right, let's compare each of these then to the root, just to see if I play the root along this string, see what that does. Let me cut and paste that. All right, let's see. So now if I compare this C to that F, and I could say, okay, what is that? That's going to be from that distance to the F, it's a distance of a 5-note away perfect fourth from the perspective of the C. 5-note away perfect fourth. How do I know that? Because it'd be 5, 10, or how can I prove it? 5, 10, distance 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Distance of 5, which we define as a perfect fourth. So then I can say, okay, now we move a whole step from the, what was that? The fourth to the fifth. So now I'm on the fourth to the fifth is a whole step to the G. So now if I go from here and I compare that to this C up top, that's going to be now the fourth to the fifth. That's going to be a 7-note away perfect fifth. How do I know that? Because if I count it down here, it'd be 5, 10, 9, 8, 7, right? And then I'm going to go, okay, let's go from the fifth to the sixth. So now I'm going from the Mixolydian to the Aeolian. Mixolydian to the Aeolian. Compare that to the root. So Mixolydian to the Aeolian. Comparing it to that C then would be a distance of a 9-note away major 6. How do I know? Because I can count it down. It would be 5, 10, and then 9. And then I'm going to go from the 6 to the 7 is a whole step. So 6 to the 7 is a whole step. Going from here to here is a whole step. So now I'm going to go, okay, from here to here is a whole step. And that distance from the C to there, so that's going from Aeolian to the Locrian. And if I compare that to the root then, that's going to be 11-note away major 7. How do I know that? Because it's 5, 10, and then 11. And that brings me back to the octave. That's going to be going from the 7 to the 1 is a half step. 7 to the 1 is a half step. So from here to here, comparing that to the 1 is an octave. Let's stop it there. I'll keep on going on the next one. I won't go in reverse this time because I'm still a little sloppy going forward. Let's master that, and then we'll do it going backwards, which is a whole nother can of worms. Let me try to tell a quick joke, though, because I got a few jokes building up here. This one, a little political on this one. I can't help it. I'm sorry if that bothers people, but, you know, got to do my joke practice, even if it's upsetting to folks, you know. So here we go. You know, what happened to Bill Burr, the comedian? You know, Bill Burr, the comedian, used to be pretty funny because he had like a charming East Coast, you know, really loud but irritated. But charming, like he wasn't like mad, you know, he's just mad. I mean, he's irritated at things, you know, and being, but then it seems like he went to being actually angry. It's like he pulled a full Robert De Niro, which is another tragic figure that came down with Trump derangement syndrome. And it's like, what in the world happened to you? What is wrong? For crying. Except now he seems to be aiming more at Elon Musk than the president at the moment. You know, but the thing is that the charming, like irritated about little things kind of thing is funny. Like Seinfeld did that all the time. You got the great Seinfeld bits where he's talking about the close talker, the puffy shirt, the double dipper, the low talker, the toilet paper roll, the speed dial. They're all just little minor petty things, but you never get the feeling that Seinfeld is actually mad. You know, he's just irritated and like whining about stuff. You know, he's never ready to call. You never get the feeling like he's ready to call for actual violence against the French fry double dipper in the ketchup, for example. He's not like he's not actually. He's just irritated. You know, that's the difference. I mean, honestly, you know, Bill Burr lately getting mad at like Elon Musk. It sounds like that old movie, The Nerds, where the jocks are like really mad at like the nerdy smart people, you know. Except that Burr's not even a jock, as far as I know. He's a comedian. So like, Why is he so mad? It's like, what?
Particularly anybody getting your ire up these days more than usual.
Nerds. And all these tech nerds that want to build robots because they don't know how to talk to hot women.
What's wrong, Burr? What's wrong? And he's like, it's those nerds. They're out there doing stuff. Who told them they could build electric vehicles that don't use any gas and send like things up into space? Bill Burr didn't give them permission to send stuff into space.
Where are they? I think they're talking about us. No way.
What kind of people, for a comedian, he's living in a time so ripe with like comedic irony these days. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. And he's over there yelling at nerds, for crying out loud. That's the best your comedic mind could come up with in this target-rich environment. I'm guessing the guy is clearly on the last leg. On the last leg, Ussie media, karma, payroll. I feel like he's on the last leg, Ussie media, karma, payroll. They're paying him. I feel like, because clearly they're trying to buy some boost to their numbers, which Burr should not participate in. You're already rich. You don't need to take the money from like the dying last leg LC media karma. They don't need their money. You're good. You could tell jokes. You could tell jokes that are like actually funny and like people will still pay you. The guy needs to pull an ogre and realize that sending rockets to Mars is actually a good thing. Even if you're too impotent to be the one that actually does it, it's still good. Okay, let's try to go to the next one here. I'm going to say now we're going from the 4 to the 5 again. So we're going from this E to the F, which would be a half step, but we're going to go down to this string down here and find the F down here. So we're going to be walking up in shape. So from the first to the second, second to the third, there's my formula, to the third, and then instead of going from the 3 to the 4 here, we're going to go from the 3 and jump down to the 4 here, and then continue on this string. And as we do so, we'll compare to the top string and think about the position in terms of modal position. Okay. So how do I know that this is going to be a half step? So that's a half step here. It's a half step here. You can see it's an octave away, but if I count from here, it should be a 1 note away half step. I can say it's 5 distance here, 10, and then 11, 12, or octave, which goes back down to 0 if I think about it as a circle, and then 1 note away. So it's a 1 note away distance here. So if I count that out on the guitar, I could say here's the E. I'm looking for a 1 note away distance. It's going to be 5, 10, 11, 12, and then there's the 1. So there's going to be, whoop, that don't sound right. It's going to be 5 from this E, 10, 11, 12, or octave, and then we're going to get to this F. That is right. It sounds tensiony, of course, because it's a 1 note away. All right, so if I count this up, we're going to say we're going from the first to the second to a whole step to the third. Instead of going a half step to the 4 here, we're going to go half step to the 4 here. Now it's a jump up in octave, so it sounds a little bit out of whack, but it's still in the key. Right, and then we're going jumping the octave up, and then we're going to go along this one down here. So now I'm on this F. So I'm on this F, which is going to be, that one went from the 3 to the 4. So now I'm going from the 4 to the 5. So now we went from the 3 to the 4. So now we're going to go from the 4 to the 5. So notice we're on the same Lydian, which is at the bottom of the box. Here's the Lydian at the bottom of the box. From the perspective of the major here, if I went to this C and measured it, it would be a 5 note away perfect 4th distance. How do I know that? 5 notes away because I can count that by 5, 10, 15. Once I get to 15, there's 12 notes in the musical alphabet. 15 minus 12 is 3. And so 3, 2, 1. Wait a sec. 3, 4, 5. 5 note away distance. All right, from here. Oops. Okay, so then let's say we're going to move from the 4th to the 5th is going to be a whole step. So we're going to go from that 4th, let's say, to this 5th with the yellow. So it's going to be 4th to the 5th is a whole step. And then if I look at this 5th, that C then, it's now, that G is the 4th, which is the Lydian to the Mixolydian. So Lydian to Mixolydian is always a whole step, and the Mixolydian lives in what I call the 2 note per string, the double stop with the D major, the Mixolydian being a major, the D, this is a Dorian. The Mixolydian is a major mode, but it doesn't live in the house because it hangs out with the blues because it has like that minor 7 to it. If I look at the interval from the C to this G, that would be, from the perspective of the C, a 5 note away perfect 5th. How do I count that? I could say it's going to be 5. If I count that up this way, it's going to be 5, 10, 15, and then 15 minus 12 will be 3, 3, 4, so it would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a 7 note away distance, which would be a 7 note away perfect 5th. Oops, not there. And then that G can also be pulled over here because it's on the 12th fret, which repeats over here. So let's bring it back to the open G. And so now let's go from the 5th to the 6th. So we're going to go from the 5th to the 6th is a whole step. And we're going from the G to the A. So the 5th to the 6th is going to be an open G to the A. So that goes from Mixolydian to Aeolian. So the Aeolian is in the, what I would call the hamburger shape here. And if I compare that to the C up top, that would be a 9 note away major 6 distance. How do we know that? Because I can say this is going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, 2, 1, 0, or octave, or 12, because I can go around the horn, 12, 11, 10, 9. 9 note away. By the way, what's the distance from the Lydian? If I looked at it from the perspective of the Lydian, then we would say from the perspective of the Lydian, why am I getting into that? I'm muddying things up. It would be a distance of, let's count it out, it would be 5, 10, and then 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, which would be a perfect 4th. So let me convert that to kind of see what that means. If I was in the Lydian mode from that E, if I think about it as the root, then it would be relative position 4 to relative position 1, which would be 4 minus 3 to get it to 1, which means the Aeolian would also have to subtract 3, so it would be 6 minus 3 would be 3. So it would be from the perspective of a Lydian mode, the first of the Lydian to the third of the Lydian, which would be going from Lydian to Aeolian. So in other words, if I went down to Lydian, moved the Lydian, wait, what am I on here? I was doing that from the F, the Lydian, from this F, measuring it from the F. I should be measuring it from the E. If I measured it from the E, then it would be 3 minus 2 would be 1. And then the Aeolian would be 6 minus 2, which would be 4. So it would be the 1 of the Phrygian to the 4 of the Phrygian. In other words, if I switched the Phrygian and I said, okay, now the absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, is now relative position 1, then the absolute mode number 6, Aeolian, the A, is now relative position 4. You see how the orientation's getting a little wacky? I'd like to be able to change my mind to be able to see it from all those different kind of perspectives is kind of like the idea here. Okay, so that means then what if I go from the Aeolian from the 7, from the 6 to the 7, from the 6 to the 7 here is going to be a whole step going from this A to this B. So going from this A to this B. So A to B is a whole step, and that's going from the Aeolian absolute mode number 6 to absolute mode number 7. The Locrian is living at the top of the box here, which I can see here, except it's been shifted up because this tectonic plate shifted to the right because the fault line is between those tectonic plates. And the Locrian, from the perspective of the major scale, is going to be an 11 note away major 7, which I can count by saying it's going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, 2, 1, 0, or octave, and then 12 minus 1 is 11, getting us to that B. So if I looked at this C to the B, that would be an 11 note away major 7. What if I looked at it from the perspective of the E, the Phrygian? Well, if I looked at it from the perspective of the Phrygian, then I'd be saying it would be going from, the Phrygian is 3. I'm going to make it the 1. 3 minus 2 makes it the 1. So that would be, and I'd do the same for the Locrian, which would be 7 minus 2, 7, 6, 5. So I would be going from the 1 of the Phrygian to the 5 of the Locrian. So if I scroll down to the Phrygian, now the Phrygian is the relative position 1, which would be that E, to the 5 of the Phrygian, which is now absolute position, or relative position 5 is now the absolute mode number 7 Locrian. So whenever I go from E to B, so that's, when I go from E to B, that's going to be a 7 note away perfect fifth, I think. Okay, I got that. All right, let's go from the 7 to the 1, which is going to be a half step. So it goes around the horn back up to the 1, half step, boom. So we're going from the Locrian, or the 7 of the major scale, half step to the 1 of the major scale. There's the major scale. That's the top right of the house, noting that this tectonic plate shifted to the right, so it's the same shape up here, except diagonally shifted because of that fault line. And so there is that. That's back to the Ionian mode. So, and that's the octave. If I go up to here, that's the octave. So from the perspective of the C, it's 12 notes away. We can count that out by saying it's going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, and then 2, 1, 0, or octave. If I look at it from the perspective of the Phrygian, Phrygian is absolute mode number 3. 3 minus 2 brings us to the first position. Therefore, if I take the Ionian, minus 2, it's mode number 1, right? Minus 2 brings me to 0, and then negative 1. I can't have a negative mode, so 7 minus 1 brings us to the 6. Is that right? If I look at it from the Phrygian as the 1 is the Ionian's 6, right? So if I looked at it from the perspective of the Phrygian, the relative mode number 3 Phrygian is now, the absolute mode 3 Phrygian is now relative position 1, and then going to the 6 would be the absolute mode 1 or Ionian. So going from E to C then is an 8 note away major 6. So if I measured it from here, 8 note away major 6, it would be 5 from this E, 5, 10, 9, 8. 8 note away major 6. Whew, head is starting to hurt. All right, let's go from the first to the second. So from the first to the second is a whole step. First to the second is a whole step. So now we're going from the C, the first, to the second, which is a D, or Ionian to Dorian. So Ionian to Dorian, that Dorian then position relative to the C is a 2-note away major second. How can I know that? I can count it. It would be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is -3, and then 2. So that would be a 2-note away major second. What would it be with respect to the Phrygian? Well, the Phrygian is mode number 3. 3 minus 2 would bring it to 1, and therefore the Dorian minus 2 would bring it to 0. But you have to have, it has to be 1 through 7, so 7 minus 0 would be 7. So from the perspective of the Dorian, it would be going from the 1st to the 7, right? So let's check that out. If I make the Dorian the 1, it's now the 1. Absolute mode number 2, Dorian, goes to wait a sec. No, I'm going to the Phrygian. Making the Phrygian the 1. Relative position 1, absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, going to relative position 7, which is now absolute mode number 2, the Dorian, brings us from the E to the D, which is a 10-note away minor 7. How can I double check that it's 10 notes away? If I count from this, it would be 5 and then 10. 10 notes away. Okay, it makes perfect sense. So now we're going from that, from the second to the third is a whole step. Second to the third is a whole step to do it. And so we're going from the D to the E. So the second to the third is a whole step. So that brings us to the third. That goes from the Dorian to the Phrygian. The Phrygian's at the basement of the box or house. And so what's the relation between it and the C, the major or Ionian? It's going to be a 4-note away major third. How can I count that? It's going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, and then 4. Okay, 4-note away major third. From the perspective of the C, from the perspective of the Phrygian, it's obviously the octave, 12-note away octave. So it's going to be 5, 10, 11, 12. All right, let's try the next string, see if I can do it a little bit faster and wrap this up, because I'm not going to do the bottom string because it repeats and because I'm tired. So we're going to go down to this one. Here's the F. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go from the first to the second in shape, second to the third in shape, but then instead of going to this fourth, I'm going to skip down to this string to that fourth and then move up along this fourth. So I'm going to say this is going to be, the first is going to be here. 1 to the 2 is a whole step, Ionian to Dorian. 2 to the 3 is a whole step, Dorian to the Phrygian. The 3 to the 4 is a half step, but instead of going to this F, I'm going to move it down to this F. Sounds a little wonky because we're jumping up an octave, but that's the idea. Okay, so I'm going to walk up to this F down here, and then I'm going to move up on this string. Now, what's that distance? It should be a half step. I was going to go a half step here. I'm going up here. Now, again, you could think, well, it's an octave higher. That's why it sounds a little wonky, but it's from this perspective of a circle, it would just be a half step, right? So how can I count that out? How can I prove that? Because it would be 5, 10. Here's the fault line, shifting this tectonic plate to the right. Therefore, if I want another 5, I have to go this way to get to 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, 2, 1. So that's going to be a half step from that E. Okay, so if I played that F down there, from the perspective of the E, it's a half step. Now from the perspective of the C, what is it? It's a 5-note away perfect fourth, right? How can I prove that? Because it would be from here, 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3. This tectonic plate shifts to the right. So I'm going to say 3 plus 5 is 8. 7, 8, 7, 6, 5. 5-note away, perfect fourth. So, and if I was to convert this E to look at it in the Phrygian mode, making it the first, I would say the absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, minus 2 to make it the 1, would make it the 1 of the Phrygian, And then if I'm looking at the F, which is the Lydian, I'd have to say, well, that's absolute mode number 4 minus 2 would bring it to the second position. So I would be going from the 1 of the Phrygian to the 2 of the Phrygian, right? So here's the Phrygian. I would be going from the E, the 1 of the Phrygian, to relative position 2 of the Phrygian, if I looked at it from that perspective. Okay, so let's go back up again, and let's count this through. So now we're going from the, from the 4, so now we're going from the 4 to the 5. So from the 4th to the 5th is going to be a whole step. So 4th to the 5th is going to be a whole step, going from the Phrygian to the to the Mixolydian. Whole step from the 4 to the 5 is a whole step, going from the Lydian to the Mixolydian, Lydian to the Mixolydian. All right, and then the Mixolydian lives with the hamburger meat of the hamburger shape hanging with the Aeolian, and then we're going to go, and so that means that this G compared to the C, if I compared it to the C, is going to be a 7 note away perfect fifth. So how can I prove that? 7 notes away, I can say it's going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, plus another 5 is 8, and then 7 back here. What if I compared it to the Phrygian? Well, if I compared it to the Phrygian, I'd make the absolute mode number 3 back to the 1. 3 minus 2 is 1, making it absolute mode number 1. And absolute mode number 5, Mixolydian, minus 2, 5, 4, 3. So it would be from the Phrygian's perspective, the 1 to the 3. Let's double check that. From Phrygian's perspective, it would be relative position 1, absolute mode number 3, to relative position 3, absolute mode number 5, the Mixolydian. The distance then would be a 3 note away, minor third between those two. How can I prove that? If I'm going from here to here, it would be 5, 10, and then 15 moving this way. 15 minus 12 is 3. Okay, so then let's go from that G to the A. From the G to the A is going to be going from the 5th to the 6th. So now I'm going from the 5th to the 6th. It's a whole step. 5th to the 6th is a whole step. And the Mixolydian, absolute mode number 5 to absolute mode number 6, Aeolian, Mixolydian to Aeolian is a whole step. So then the Aeolian, if I compared it to the C, the root is going to be a 9 note away major 6. How can I prove that? Because it's going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3. Going diagonal because the fault line shifts up. It's going to be 3 plus 5 is 8. And then another one is 9. 9 note away. What if I compared it to the E? The E is absolute mode number 3. To get it to the first, 3 minus 2 brings it to the 1. And the absolute mode number 6 minus 2, 6, 5, 4. So from the perspective of the Phrygian, it would be going from the 1st to the 4th. From the 1st to the 4th of the Phrygian would be going from E, the 1st to the 4th, but would still be absolute mode number 3 Phrygian to absolute mode number 6 Aeolian, which is always going to be a distance of a 5 note away perfect fourth. How can I prove that? If I count it from here, 5 notes away, it's going to be 5, 10, and then 15 because this shifted to the right. 15 minus 12 is going to be 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then let's move to the next one. We're going to go to the 6th is a whole step. So 6 is a whole step here. And we're going to go to from the 6 to the 7. From the 6 to the 7 is a whole step. Okay, 6 to, and then 6 to the 7, 6 to the 7. I think I've got that. So now we're going to go from this A6 to the 7, which is Aeolian to the Locrian. Absolute mode number 6, Aeolian to absolute mode number 7, Locrian. The Locrian is in the box. Here's the box. So it's right behind the C, just like it is up top. And so that's going to be that. If I look at the distance or the interval related to the C up top, let's say here, related to the C, that would be an interval of an 11 note away major 7. How can I double check that? Because it would be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, plus another 5 is 8, shifted up this way because of the kink in the tuning. 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, what is it with respect to the E? Well, the E is the Phrygian, absolute mode number 3. To bring it to 1 would be subtracting 2, and absolute mode number 7 minus an equivalent to 7, 6, 5. So it would be equivalent to, from the Phrygian's perspective, the first of the Phrygian to the fifth of the Phrygian. Let's look at that down here, Phrygian. If I look at the first of the Phrygian, now being the E, then we go to the fifth of the Phrygian, which is now absolute mode number 7, the Locrian. We're still going from E to B, from Phrygian to Locrian. Therefore, whenever I go from Phrygian to Locrian, we know that's going to be a 7 note away perfect fifth. So if I go up top and check that, is it a 7 note away perfect fifth? Let's count it from the E, 5, 10, and then 15 out this way. So 15 minus 12 is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there we have it. All right, that B also repeats over here. We have the open B in open position. Okay, so then we're going to say, let's go from the 7 to the 8, which is going to be a half step. 8 could also be 1, going around the top, around the horn. 7 to 8 is a half step, going from, I'm going to say the open B here to the C, open B to the C, or going from Locrian to Ionian. So now we're on the C, which is of course the octave. This note is an octave of this C. And so it lives up at the top of the house, just as this one does. And we're going to say then, from the perspective of the E, what is that? Well, from the perspective of the E is the Phrygian. Phrygian minus 2 to get it to the first is minus 2. And then that means that the Ionian minus 2 would bring us to 1. 1 minus 2 would be 0, and then negative 1. And to bring it positive, we take 7 minus 1, which would bring it to 6. So from the Phrygian's perspective, it would be the first to the sixth. So let's check that out in Phrygian to double check it. So we have relative position 1 of absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, to relative position 6, absolute mode number 1, Ionian. We're still going from E to D, and that means that anytime we go from the Phrygian to the Ionian, we get a distance of an 8 note away minor 6. Let's double check that up here. 8 note away minor 6 is going to be from this E, 5, 10, and then 15 out this way because the fault line shifts to the right. 15 minus 12 is 3, 2, 1, 0, or octave, or 12, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Okay, so then let's go from the first to the second. So we're going to go from the first to the second. And then we'll go here from the first to the second. Okay, that's not the second. To the D. It's a whole step. So from the first to the second is a whole step. From here, from that C or Ionian to this D, which is the Dorian, right? Okay. So that D is the Dorian now. I can compare it to the C up top. So comparing this C to that D is going to be a 2 note away major second. 2 note away major second. What if I compared it to the E, which is the Phrygian, which would be 3 minus 2 to get it to 1, which would make it the 1. That means I would subtract 2 from absolute mode number 2, Dorian. 2 minus 2 is 0, but I have to have 7, so 7 minus 0 would be the 7. So from the perspective of the Phrygian, it would be relative position 1 of the Phrygian to relative position 7 of the Phrygian. Let's look at the Phrygian. So now we have the E is now relative position 1 of absolute mode number 3, Phrygian, to the D, which is now relative position 7, absolute mode number 2, Dorian. So anytime we're going from a Phrygian to a Dorian, the interval is going to be a 10 note away minor 7. Let's double check that. 10 note away minor 7 would be 5, 10, 15, because this fault line shifts to the right. 15 minus 12 is going to be negative 3, 2, 1, 0, or 12, 12, 11, 10. 10 note away minor 7. I think that's right. Okay. And then if I go from the second back home, I'm sorry, from the second to the third, from the second to the third, we're going from the Dorian to the Phrygian. Dorian to the Phrygian. So we're going from this D Dorian to the Phrygian, and that's going to be a whole step. So we have a whole step there. And so now we're on the E. The E with relation to the C was a 4 note away major third, which we can count up by saying this is going to be 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, plus another 5, shifting the tectonic plate up. Hold on, que paso. Shifting this tectonic plate up. So it's going to be 5, 10, 15. And then 15 minus 12. What happened? 15 minus 12 is, let's see, 5, 10, and then 15. What did I just do here? I'm counting it up from that C. So, oh no. Oh no, it's all falling apart. Everything is falling apart. I can't do it anymore. 5, 10, 15. 15 minus 12 is 3, plus another 5 is 8. 7, 6, 5, 4. So 4 note away major third. All right, my head is dying. I think I'm getting a little bit more in a pattern here that we're working on. So again, hopefully I'll get comfortable enough that I can do this a lot quicker and more succinctly as we go, and look at these patterns from different perspectives in a way that'll kind of drill it in our mind, and then hopefully get to the point where I can do it in reverse as well, so we can start looking at the pattern going backwards the other way.